Hey there, and welcome to Solid Horror Reviews. I'm Solid Zaku, and today I'll be reviewing Tales from the Darkside, the movie. Now, before I begin, this video does contain spoilers and gory visuals from the movie. So if you don't want any spoilers, or if you're too squeamish about movie blood or gore, please turn away from this video now. You have been warned. Let us begin. Tales from the Darkside is a 1990 anthology horror film that brings George A. Romero and Stephen King together again after their last film, Creepshow 2, which came out in 1987. Though this film, much like Creepshow 2, isn't directed by Romero, the tag team horror duo do share the segment Cat from Hell as screenplay and writer respectively. This film has always been widely considered as the unofficial Creepshow 3 due to the involvement of Romero, King, and many of the crew returning from the previous two installments of the Creepshow movies. The film has 3 stories contained within a wraparound, and the titles go as the following. The wraparound story is literally called The Wraparound Story, in which is a familiar Hansel and Gretel story minus Gretel, as the little boy Timmy is about to be cooked for dinner by a witch, and he tells her 3 scary stories that bide his time. The first real story is called Lot 249, where at a college, 2 students receive a new archaeological goodie, a mummy with a hidden scroll inside of it. The story unravels itself through incantations, treachery, and death. The second story, titled Cat from Hell, is about an old miser that hires a professional hitman to kill, of all things in his mansion, a black cat. But this hellacious kitty has more than 9 lives to boot, and he gives our hitman a run for his money. The third and final story, Lover's Vow, is about a down and out of luck artist that gives a vow to a monster in exchange for his life, and how things quickly turn up for this said artist when he encounters the love of his life that very night. Tales of the Darkside has some interesting horror stories and feels very much akin to the previous Creepshow movies, albeit not as comic booky with the exception of Cat from Hell. I feel like the stories Lot 249 and Lover's Vow have more of that 90s or at the time modern pacing and tone, whereas Cat from Hell feels very comic bookish and fits right along with the previous Creepshow movie stories. It's funny I say this because Cat from Hell was originally supposed to be in Creepshow 2, but it was taken out due to budget constraints. But by no means does tonal difference of the 3 stories breaks the overall tone of the movie. Everything just fits well. But Cat from Hell does seem a little bit off. Just a tad bit off. At this junction of the review, I do want to focus on specific things for each story in this movie. The wraparound story is actually a pretty good wraparound story. I enjoy a lot of Timmy's banter with the witch, and him trying to stall her or stop her from what she's doing. The witch's blasé attitude was actually kind of funny too, with how she talks about prepping and cooking Timmy, and of course her reactions at the end of each story. Speaking of ending, I like how they kept with that whole Hansel and Gretel story with an interesting turnaround and roasting the witch. For the story Lot 249, it's probably the weakest of the 3 stories, but by no means it's not good. I really enjoy the cast here with Steve Buscemi, a babyface Christian Slater, and Julianne Moore. The cast did a great job playing off of each other, and you get a strong sense of the nastiness from the yuppies, but also getting something sinister from Buscemi's character. The special effects for the mummy were, alright. I feel like the face had that same issue like the ghoulish father from the first Creepshow had. It kind of looked like much more of a mask, and it really does show. But in certain shots and frames, the lighting and the darkness kind of actually made the mummy look convincing and kind of creepy. In Cat from Hell, like I mentioned before, brings back Romero and King together, but not as a director-writer tag team. King wrote the story, and Romero adapted it for a screen, and it shows. I think along with director John Harrison, the movie brings out a lot of this comic book vibe. I love a lot of the transition shots in this story. It's not editing, but pure cinematic magic of visually going from present to past and vice versa. The usage of blue filters are very reminiscent of Creepshow's usage of color filters, but rather than being for the comic book visual, these filters were more used for flashback sequences. Tying together all the visuals alongside with King's writing for an outrageous story, and it really feels like this story does belong with the first 2 Creepshow movies. Aside from that, This story has the most craziest and horrifying kill in the entire movie. Of course, I'm talking about when the hitman Halcyon is literally deep-throated by the entire body of this cat and chokes on the furball, which then proceeds to crawl down this guy's throat and nestles in his stomach. Good lord, that was horrifying. Even though there were some moments that looked kind of comical and fake, like the wee little kitty feet kicking around, the overall death scene is shocking. I feel like this is the full-on scene we didn't get from the first Creepshow movie in the story They're Crawling Up on You. The scene where Pratt dies from shock, but later shows roaches gushing from his mouth and popping from his throat. In Cat from Hell, we get both forced ingestation of the cat, and then later when Drogon returns home, the forced regurgitation of the cat exiting Halcyon. Just wow. I think visually the only shot I did not like in the entire story was the weird final upward canted shot of a dead Drogon with the kitty on his lap. I get why it was shot this way, but I felt like it was completely out of place compared to how the entire story was shot to begin with. The last story, Lover's Vow, has probably the most interesting story because it's more of a drama love story than horror. I find it interesting because you don't often find horror movies or stories that really revolve around this. It's kind of like a missed subgenre that gets lost amongst slasher, creature, and supernatural horror films. Now, the special effects for Lover's Vow is probably the best in the entire movie. While the deaths have some gore to it, I'm really talking about the transformation sequence for Radon Chong's character. The transformation is beautifully done with practical effects and was absolutely horrific to watch. The stages of each transformation from human to subhuman to gargoyle was fantastic and astounding. It seems like this is why I always argue that practical effects, when they're pulled off right, look so much better than CGI. With all the stories wrapped up at this point, if I had to consider best story of the bunch from this movie, I would say that Lover's Vow ties with Cat from Hell. But it's really based off of my mood at the time. Do I feel a little bit of silliness and supernaturally with my horror stories? Or do I feel more like a horror love story? Sometimes I just really can't pick. But if you really want an absolute response from me, at the time of this recording, I would have to say I slightly favor Cat from Hell more than Lover's Vow. But in all honesty, I really do enjoy both of them equally. Creepshow 3, Tales from the Darkside, the movie, does a good job of keeping you invested with 3 tales of horror with varying tones. Each story is well paced, with some having fantastic special and practical effects. While the thrills and chills are rather tame for the movie, the moments of horror are delivered where they matter the most. Tales from the Darkside, the movie, gets a solid 3 out of 5. And that's my thoughts on Tales from the Darkside. But tell me, what do you think of my opinion or your thoughts on this movie? Leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and of course subscribe to my channel. And make sure to click the bell button to get updates whenever I release new videos or reviews. Thanks for watching this episode of Solid Horror Reviews, and until the next review, see you next time.